We were high school sweethearts who became college lovers, surviving long distance and the growing pains of living together, even though I gave up my best career leads just to be with her. However, every single argument ended with her forcing me to write a formal apology letter, which felt more like a lecture than a conversation. I had already planned my entire future around her, but she never appreciated my devotion and constantly used the threat of a breakup to keep me in line. Now, Ava was telling me she wanted to end things yet again. This marked the 88th time this month alone that she had brought up breaking up. Usually, I followed a specific routine where I would head down to the river to clear my head before going home to draft another groveling apology to win her back. When I reached the pier, the wind off the water was so biting and miserable that I found myself cursing at the cold instead of feeling heartbroken. Since I could not muster a single shred of romantic sadness, I decided to just head back and get the apology letter over with. I had barely stepped through the front door when my boss called, ordering me to pack a bag for an immediate business trip. I was swamped with work for over a month, and just as my career was starting to reach a new peak, my phone rang. Ava was on the other end of the line, asking why I had not come over to apologize to her yet. I froze for a second before telling her that I had been so overwhelmed with work that I completely forgot about her. I followed that up by suggesting that we should probably just make the breakup official. My friends were all laughing and talking when someone teased me about how long we had been together and asked when the wedding would be. I looked over at Ava, but before she could answer, she let out a cold snort and shut the conversation down. She told everyone that they would have to wait until I could produce $100,000 for the down payment on our house. She paused and stared right at me before adding that she had already promised Ethan he could be the best man at our wedding. Her words left me completely stunned and speechless. I honestly could not tell if she was trying to pressure me into coming up with the money or if she was just obsessed with having her childhood friend Ethan at the center of her wedding. I took a slow sip of water to steady myself before mentioning that the money was almost fully accounted for. I then clarified that my own group of close friends had been asking to be my groomsmen for years. I explained that my college roommates will be filling those roles, so there was no reason to trouble Ethan. Ava did not even look up from her phone when she suggested that I should just add an extra spot for him. I sighed and reminded her that my family is quite traditional about these things. I already had 4 groomsmen picked out, and adding Ethan would make the numbers uneven, which my parents would see as a bad omen. Her voice took on an impatient edge as she told me to just find another person to balance it out. She claimed that Ethan was being so helpful that she could not possibly turn him down. Our friends had gone quiet because they were all too familiar with these awkward public spats. They never bothered to step in because they knew the night would end with me apologizing and begging for her forgiveness. At most, Ava would ignore me for a couple of days before things went back to normal. None of our friends wanted to be the fool who got involved in our drama. This time, however, I stood my ground. I told her that Ethan's enthusiasm was his own problem, and how she chose to handle him was up to her. I made it clear that deciding who stood at the altar with me was my decision alone. I told her my answer was final. Ava took a step toward me and glared into my eyes, asking what I would do if she refused to back down. I remained silent, but she could see the defiance in my expression. She exploded in a fit of rage, declaring that we were through and telling me never to call her again. She slammed the door on her way out, leaving the entire room in an uncomfortable silence. I made a few quick excuses for her behavior until the tension finally began to lift. One of the guys laughed and told me that since I was acting so bold, Ava would surely come crawling back soon. He said that women just need a little bit of sweet talking to get over their anger. A few others shook their heads, telling me that I had spoiled her for far too long. They even mentioned that the wedding date I had picked out originally was nothing special anyway. My friend offered to have his uncle pick a better date, claiming the man was an expert whose clients never seemed to end up in divorce court. I just gave a polite smile and kept my mouth shut. I went for a long walk alone, hoping the fresh air would clear the fog in my mind. Every step I took brought back a flood of memories from my decade-long history with Ava. It started with a high school crush and grew into a real relationship in college, surviving the grueling years of being apart. Then came the endless friction of finally sharing an apartment and trying to merge our lives. We hit obstacles at every turn, but I was always the one working overtime to fix things. I found myself constantly wondering how we had reached this point. I wondered if loving someone truly required such constant humiliation. I did not understand why being in a relationship meant I had to be an emotional punching bag whenever she was upset. It seemed unfair that I was never allowed to use logic or reason during our fights. I questioned why a relationship could not involve mutual sacrifice and support. I crave a partnership built on understanding and patience rather than constant conflict. To me, love and logic were never meant to be enemies. Loving someone should not mean losing your right to be heard. It should not mean you have to stay silent while they act irrationally. True love is not measured by an exorbitant down payment on a house or by refusing to contribute anything at all. Every time I finally gathered the strength to leave her, a voice in the back of my head would stop me. I worried that if I walked away now, the last 10 years of my life would have been a total waste. So I stayed and endured the pain, clinging to the hope that she would eventually change. I genuinely believed that if I loved her hard enough, we would find a way to make it work. Lost in my own thoughts, I realized I had walked all the way back to the river. I had jokingly nicknamed this spot Forgiveness River because of how often I came here to cool off. This was my sanctuary where I would vent my frustrations and try to find some mental clarity after our blowouts. However, the biting cold tonight was becoming unbearable. Before I could even start feeling sorry for myself, I was shivering so hard that my skin broke out in goosebumps. I pulled my collar up tight and decided that being heartbroken could wait until I was back in my warm house. As I turned to leave, I spotted a small grill stand nearby. It was funny how often I ended up at this exact spot. I remembered one time I was so furious after an argument that I ordered 50 sliders, but I was so upset that I could barely swallow 2 of them. The owner's cooking had improved tremendously over the years, and since I had barely eaten at the party, the savory smell of grilled meat was suddenly irresistible. I played it safe this time and only ordered a small portion, not wanting to waste food again. As I ate, I realized my appetite was actually coming back. With my stomach full and my mind occupied, the hollow ache in my chest began to subside. But as I reached my front door, I felt a familiar wave of hesitation. We had lived together for so long that every corner of the apartment was a reminder of our shared history. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a mountain of shipping boxes cluttering the entryway. They were all filled with expensive makeup and designer labels she had ordered. The shoe rack was overflowing, and her heels were scattered all over the floor like trash. In that moment, my annoyance at her messiness completely overshadowed any sadness I felt about our breakup. This was her constant pattern, treating my hard-earned paycheck like it was an infinite resource. Whenever I suggested we save a little money, she would immediately turn it into a fight. She used to ask me why she should bother being with me if it meant she had to lower her standard of living. She acted like an heiress, spending her own fortune, when in reality, I was the one funding everything. To keep her happy, I'd spent the last year wearing the same few outfits over and over again. I survived on the same 5 cheap meals just so she could shop without limits. She never once considered the sacrifices I was making just to maintain her lifestyle. My growing resentment quickly incinerated whatever lingering affection I had left for her. After I finished cleaning the apartment, I went onto Facebook and archived all our old photos. I did not want to be haunted by those memories every time I opened my phone. Right then, a notification popped up in our work chat with my boss asking for revisions on my latest project. I dove into the work and kept going until the sun started to rise over the horizon. I was surprised to realize that my first day as a single man had been completely stress-free. As the new day began, I took the final step and blocked Ava on every platform without a second thought. Ava had not returned to the apartment yet because she was waiting for me to crawl back and apologize. Even I assumed that I would eventually break down and beg for her return. Compromising for the sake of love had become a habit over the years, so it didn't feel particularly embarrassing. However, every time I reached for my phone lately, I was too busy with work projects and client calls to think about her. Work consumed all my focus, making the days blur together. Before I knew it, over a week had passed without me sending her a single message. I had managed to do something I once thought was impossible. To my surprise, I was not experiencing any of the soul-crushing agony I had expected. During a morning briefing, my manager announced that a major client needed a dedicated team member to work on site for at least 18 months. It was a massive commitment that required someone to relocate. We would not be coming back until the entire project was completed. I raised my hand almost instantly, but my manager looked at me and said he wanted to prioritize the single employees first. I immediately blurted out that I was single, causing the entire room to erupt in laughter. My dramatic ups and downs with Ava were common office gossip, so everyone thought I was joking. However, after asking around, the supervisor realized no one else was willing to volunteer. Leaving the main office for that long could lead to a dead end when you returned. Professionally speaking, it was a risky move that most of my colleagues wanted to avoid. For me, it was the perfect excuse to get some distance from Ava and clear my head. More importantly, the job was based in San Francisco, a city I had always dreamed of living in but never could. Ava was stubborn about never leaving her hometown, believing no other place could offer her the same comfort. Because of her, we had never even considered looking for opportunities in other cities. She even shot down the idea of a simple vacation to San Francisco. My friends used to joke that she was terrified I would fall in love with the city and never come home. I would just laugh it off. In the end, the supervisor gave me the position since I was the only one who actually wanted it. Before I left, he sat me down for a serious talk. He told me that regardless of what happened with my girlfriend, I had to commit to the full 18 months. I gave him a confident smile and promised that I would not let the company down. My first few weeks in San Francisco were an absolute whirlwind of meetings and deadlines. I was putting in so much overtime that I didn't even have a spare moment to look for a permanent apartment. I spent those first few weeks living out of a hotel provided by the client. It was not until my third weekend that I finally had the chance to go out and explore the city streets. The city looked exactly like the photos I had seen in travel magazines, but being there in person was a completely different experience. I could finally feel the unique energy and atmosphere of the place. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing I had made the right choice to move. Right as that thought crossed my mind, my mother called me. Her call was a surprise because we had barely been on speaking terms since our massive fallout over a year ago. Ever since I turned 25, my parents had been relentlessly nagging me to get married. Now that I was 28, their constant pressure still had not worked on me. Every visit home turned into a lecture about how I was failing my ancestors and would be the one to end the Miller family name. My mother asked if I seriously intended to wait until I was 30 to settle down. She joked that even if she searched through 100 years of Miller family history, she would never find another son as stubborn as me. I joked that my uniqueness was exactly why I was helping the family broaden its horizons. She snapped back immediately, telling me she did not have time for my nonsense. She mentioned that my sister had seen my Facebook post about the breakup with Ava. She wanted to know if we had actually called it quits for good this time. My mother pointed out that usually we were back together within a few days. She noticed that this time was different and wanted to confirm if the relationship was truly dead. I was getting annoyed and told her to just get to the point because I had a mountain of work to finish. She grumbled that my attitude was just as bad as my father's, and that was why he and I could never be in the same room without arguing. I told her I was going to hang up if she did not start making sense. She started shouting for me to wait as soon as she realized I was serious about ending the call. She told me that my aunt had found a girl she wanted me to meet this weekend. Apparently, the girl lived in the same city where I was working. I informed her that I was no longer in our hometown and that I had actually relocated for a new project. Her voice got much louder as she demanded to know why I had moved so suddenly. She started complaining about how I had always been impulsive and never listened to a word of her advice. I did not have the energy for a fight, so I just asked for the girl's details. I also jokingly asked how much my aunt was charging her for this matchmaking service. My mother's aggressive tone vanished instantly as she began to stammer. She explained that the girl was the goddaughter of a CEO friend of my aunt and worked as an executive assistant. She claimed the girl was stunningly beautiful and had somehow bought a mansion at 24. She tried to reassure me that my aunt only had my best interests at heart. I was completely floored by her story and could not believe she was telling me this with a straight face. I burst out laughing and asked her if she actually believed the nonsense she was saying. My mother got defensive and told me to stop being so incredibly sarcastic. She reminded me of the last time my aunt had set me up and how she had apologized for it. She insisted that my aunt had no idea about that girl's true history. My mother argued that my aunt would never have made the introduction if she had known the truth. I was left speechless by her logic because if my aunt did not know the girl, she had no business setting us up in the first place. On that previous occasion, my aunt had pestered me to add a girl on iMessage even though I was not interested. I finally gave in and added her just to get my aunt to leave me alone. Once we were connected, I mentioned that we had been set up by a mutual friend, and she immediately replied with her hourly rate. I was absolutely mortified to realize that my aunt had accidentally set me up with a sex worker. I asked her to confirm she was the person my aunt had mentioned just to be sure. She got all flustered and apologized before introducing herself as Maria. I was so disgusted that I blocked her immediately and ended the conversation. I could not believe my aunt was trying to play matchmaker again after such a disaster. I told my mother to tell her sister to stay out of my business. I warned her that if my aunt tried another stunt like that, I would have some very choice words for her the next time I saw her. My mother called me ungrateful before hanging up. As the silence settled around me, I realized how much I truly appreciated the peace and quiet of my new life. I finished the project revisions and uploaded them to our group chat. The client sent back a wave of compliments and emojis, which definitely lifted my spirits. I posted a quick update on Facebook about how much I was enjoying my new environment. I usually get a fair amount of engagement, but the response to this post was much larger than I anticipated. My friends started joking that I had become a total workaholic. They mentioned how I had been missing in action for a week and assumed I was just buried in work. One guy joked that I was so focused on work that I was totally oblivious to what was happening back at my home base. Another friend asked why I hadn't taken down the breakup post yet and why we weren't back together. He even joked that maybe I hadn't planned a big enough grand gesture to win her back. I responded to everyone by saying I was out of town and would see them when I got back. I added that my heart was currently a ghost town and that the breakup was definitely permanent. As soon as I put my phone down, Martin called me. He was a close friend who had always been a regular at the dinners Ava and I used to host. He asked me where I'd been hiding out lately. I told him I was just buried under a mountain of work. He went quiet for a moment before asking in a low voice if I was actually out of town. He mentioned that he had stopped by my place a few days ago, but nobody was home. I confirmed that I was away, and he quickly claimed he just wanted to grab dinner and catch up. I promised to treat him to dinner as soon as I returned. I was about to hang up when he suddenly asked if I had heard any of the rumors about Ava and Ethan. I told him the truth, which was that I had been too busy to keep up with any of that drama. I was ready to end the call, but Martin kept talking anyway. He told me that Ethan and Ava had been very public lately, showing up to every party as a couple. Apparently, Ethan had even bought her a massive diamond ring recently. It was the talk of our friend group, and everyone was speculating that they were officially dating. However, Ava hadn't confirmed anything yet, which led everyone to believe she was still holding out for an apology from me. I let out a short laugh and asked him exactly what I was supposed to be apologizing for. He seemed stunned for a moment before reminding me that I was always the one to cave in first. I told him that I only did that because I still cared back then, but things were different now that I was over her. Right after I said that, I heard a loud bang as a door slammed on the other end of the line. Then I heard one of Ava's best friends calling out her name in the background. He sounded incredibly embarrassed and hung up almost immediately. I had known the moment he started talking that Ava was probably right there listening. After all our years together, I knew our social circle inside and out. Martin had always been a terrible liar and was usually much more direct with me. From the very start of the call, he sounded stiff and uncomfortable. It did not take much effort to realize that something was definitely off. A while later, a long iMessage from Martin popped up on my screen. He apologized for the weird phone call and then gave me the full story about what had been going on with Ava and Ethan. He admitted that Ava was clearly miserable and had been crashing at his place for days. He told me she had annoyed him so much that he only agreed to call me to get her off his back. He said he didn't think she actually liked Ethan and confessed that he always thought I deserved better anyway. He encouraged me to move on and invited me for a drink whenever I was back in town. Martin was a good guy at heart. I started to wonder if he had purposely made the call so awkward just to give me a heads up that she was listening. None of that really mattered to me anymore. The only thing that was important was the overwhelming sense of relief I felt in that moment. Later that afternoon, my phone showed a notification for a blocked call from Ava. Seeing her name in my blocked list felt strange but good. It was amusing that it had taken her an entire month to finally try calling me herself. She had clearly tried every other way to get my attention through our friends before finally breaking down and reaching out directly. I realized in that moment that the last decade of my life had been spent on someone who didn't truly value me. A few seconds later, a text message from an unknown number appeared. It was Ava asking where I had put her suitcase. Even after everything, she still spoke to me with that same entitled and arrogant tone. She couldn't even bring herself to be direct, and instead tried to use a missing suitcase as an excuse to talk. I chose to ignore the message entirely. My phone rang again after my evening meeting was over. I wasn't paying attention and answered it without checking the caller ID, only to hear Ava's voice. Her voice sounded typically cold, but I could detect a slight tremor of anxiety. When she asked where I was, I simply told her I was at the office. She demanded to know why I had blocked her. I calmly reminded her that we were no longer together. Her voice got louder as she asked why I was blocking her now when I had never done it during our previous breakups. I asked her how she could possibly know whether I had blocked her in the past. I pointed out that she had never once tried to call me first and that I was always the one crawling back to beg for her forgiveness. She repeated her question about my location. My coworkers were all packing up and saying their goodbyes as they headed out for the evening. I was so busy saying goodbye to my team that I didn't realize Ava had gone completely silent on the other end of the line. I realized the call was still active and said hello. She responded by telling me that this was the first time I had ever prioritized other people over her. I had absolutely nothing to say to that and felt no need to justify my actions to her. She asked if I was in San Francisco because she had recognized the local accent in the background. There was no point in lying since she could easily have found out from my office. I told her straight out that I was there on a business trip. Her voice grew soft as she reminded me that I used to refuse all business trips. She brought up how I used to worry that no one would look after her if I was gone. She reminded me that I had always put her first, which made me feel a strange mix of amusement and resentment. I realized how pathetic I had been for the last decade and vowed to start prioritizing my own needs for a change. I told her that I was simply following her own instructions to stop contacting her. Since we were no longer in each other's lives, my travel plans were none of her business. I asked her if she had any idea how many career opportunities one had sacrificed for her. She started to say something but then hesitated, so I pushed her to finish her thought. She remained silent for what felt like forever without saying another word. After a long, awkward silence, I was the one who finally ended the call. That conversation was incredibly depressing because it was clear she knew I was gone for good. Despite that, she still couldn't bring herself to ask me to stay. I had been through enough drama over the years to be mentally prepared for this. My heart had been broken so many times that it had finally just turned to stone. I was not feeling sad anymore. Instead, it felt as if a massive weight had finally been lifted off my chest. I truly hoped that all of our history together would end with that one phone call so that I could finally move on with my life for good. Right after I signed the lease for my new place in San Francisco, I invited all the guys I had been working with on the project over to my new apartment for a housewarming party. My coworkers and I were laughing as we walked out of the office lobby when a figure near the entrance suddenly caught my attention. Even my colleagues stopped to look as we rarely saw someone that striking standing outside our building. I followed their gaze and looked up to see Ava standing just a few yards away in the crowd. It occurred to me then that it had been nearly a month since I last laid eyes on her. We had not been apart for this long since we finished college and moved in together. Surprisingly, the time away had made me realize that being without her was actually not that difficult. She walked toward me with her head down while my colleagues watched us with curious expressions. One of them took the hint and told the group that it looked like I had plans, suggesting we reschedule our get-together for another night. For the first time, I felt that having such perceptive friends was a bit of a burden. Ava, however, seemed perfectly comfortable as she played the part of the shy girlfriend and said goodbye to everyone in the group. Once we were alone, she looked up at me and asked why I had not come to apologize to her yet. In that moment, I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. I had spent years pouring every ounce of my energy into supporting someone who was incredibly selfish and demanding. She had traveled all the way to San Francisco to see me, but instead of having a mature conversation, she was back to her old games. Her very first words to me were a demand for an apology. I found myself wondering why I was always expected to be the one to fix things, and why it was always my responsibility to soothe her ego. I felt like telling her to go back home and let her father deal with her moods. I began to realize that in our relationship, my initial willingness to compromise had turned into a life sentence of being her doormat. I had spent a decade loving her with everything I had, yet I could not even get a shred of basic respect in return. I took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eye, and told her that I had no intention of ever getting back together. Saying those words felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It was the moment I finally reclaimed my dignity and the person I used to be before I met her. She stood there with her mouth open, unable to speak for a long time before finally asking me why. I simply told her that I was exhausted from the constant drama. I explained to her that I was tired of walking on thin ice and wondering when the next explosion would happen over some tiny detail. Since we had been apart, I had finally experienced what it was like to have a peaceful and quiet life. I no longer had to wake up worried about our next argument or be careful about every word I said for fear of a breakup. I was finally the center of my own life and in full control of my own happiness. The freedom was intoxicating. Ava bit her lip and asked if I'd stopped loving her, looking up at me without the usual arrogant tilt of her chin. She used to look at me with such judgment and disdain, always acting like she was the one in charge of my life. Now, she was staring at the ground, looking defeated and unable to meet my eyes. It had taken me a decade of sacrifice to finally see her humbled like this. I told her in a steady voice that she was probably right and that my feelings for her had simply died. She lunged forward and grabbed my arm in a panic, but I firmly pushed her away. For a second, the look of pure shock and pain in her eyes almost got to me. She whispered that I had actually pushed her away. I let out a long sigh and asked if she remembered how many times I had to get on my knees and beg for her to come back to me. Ava had been a spoiled princess her entire life, and I was the one who had chased her relentlessly in high school. Back then, I thought we were destined to be together forever. From the very beginning, I would always swallow my pride to make her smile whenever she was angry. I had chased after her through the streets more times than I could count whenever she decided to storm off. She treated the idea of breaking up like a casual hobby. I remembered one time she saw some nonsense on TikTok and asked for my opinion, then threatened to end our relationship just because my answer wasn't exactly what she wanted to hear. Thinking back on those moments made me feel like I had been under some kind of spell or was just plain stupid. I couldn't believe I had allowed myself to be treated that way for so long. She went quiet as I listed my grievances, clearly realizing for the first time how ridiculous her behavior had been. Even she had to admit that she had crossed the line way too many times. I told her that before she started questioning my loyalty, she should take a long look in the mirror. She looked confused and asked me what I meant by that. I asked her to consider if she had ever truly loved me before she questioned my feelings for her. I left her standing there in silence and walked away without giving her a second glance. You never realize how much better life can be until you finally take the leap and make a change. I was shocked to discover just how much more relaxed my life was without Ava constantly hanging over me. I felt like a free man for the first time in a decade. Even when she tried to show up unannounced, I found that I was no longer affected by her presence. A few weeks later, I was surprised to see her sitting across from me at a business negotiation. She clearly knew nothing about the energy sector and was only there because of her family's influence. She had landed a job at a mid-sized energy firm whose CEO was looking to partner with my main client. Since I was the lead consultant on the project, I was required to be at the meeting. My job was to handle the technical questions, and Ava spent the entire afternoon grilling me on every tiny detail of our proposal. I had to stay completely focused and professional while addressing her throughout the session. The meeting did not wrap up until 6 in the evening. Ava stood up with a professional smile and announced that her boss, CEO Wilson, had arranged for us all to have dinner together at a restaurant downstairs. My manager, Harrison, politely declined the offer and insisted that he should be the one to host the dinner. He said it was only right for him to take care of the bill since they had traveled to see us. I tried to slip away while everyone was busy gathering their things, but Harrison noticed me. He looked around the room and called out my name before I could make it to the door. I had no choice but to stop and tell him I was still there. He waved me over and insisted that I join them for dinner as a reward for all my hard work during the presentation. He complimented my detailed product demo and then introduced me formally to CEO Wilson. Harrison admitted that he had initially been worried about my youth, but was now completely impressed with my performance. He joked that my boss had sent me specifically to keep him happy, and that the partnership had been seamless ever since I arrived. CEO Wilson agreed that I was a rising star in the industry and said the future belonged to guys like me. He then pulled Ava over to join our circle and introduced her to the group. He introduced her as his niece and suggested that we should get to know each other better since we seemed to communicate so well during the meeting. Ava reached out her hand and formally introduced herself as if we were total strangers. I had no idea that a routine business dinner was about to turn into such a spectacle. As we walked into the restaurant, we ran right into Ethan standing in the lobby. He walked up to Ava with a grin and asked why she hadn't mentioned she was in town. He even made a point of mentioning that they had been texting just a few minutes ago. It was obvious to everyone in the room that their relationship was much more than just a casual friendship. The way he spoke to her made it clear they were in constant communication. CEO Wilson laughed and suggested that Ethan should join us for dinner since he was a friend of Ava's. Ethan quickly agreed and threw an arm around Ava's shoulder in a clear attempt to mark his territory. He accepted the invitation while one of my coworkers whispered to me about how obvious he was being. It was an incredibly awkward display of possessiveness in a professional setting. I thought he was an idiot for acting that way in front of her boss and our clients. Ava looked visibly uncomfortable with his behavior and tried to pull away. She kept glancing over at me while we all stood awkwardly in the doorway. The whole situation was becoming increasingly ridiculous and embarrassing for everyone involved. Harrison finally stepped in to break the tension and led us to our table. I made an excuse to use the restroom and took my time getting back, hoping to avoid any more direct interaction. When I finally returned to the table, Ethan was in the middle of telling everyone that he and Ava were just friends. He added that she already had a boyfriend, clearly enjoying the drama he was creating. One of my more outspoken colleagues didn't miss a beat and remarked that her boyfriend must be a very miserable man. Harrison looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole as he asked me why I had decided to come tonight. He knew I usually avoided these types of business dinners like the plague. I realized the guy who had made the comment was David Sterling, a massive guy from our design team. He was famous for being brutally honest and didn't care at all about corporate politics or social niceties. David shrugged and said he was just there for the free food since the meeting had run so late. He acted like his insulting comment had been perfectly normal conversation. Harrison sighed and introduced him to CEO Wilson and Ava. He explained that David was the head of our design department and a key member of the project. Ethan couldn't help but make a snide comment about how large and rugged David looked for a design director. He joked that David looked more like a construction worker than a creative and asked if our design process required heavy lifting. Harrison just rolled his eyes, but I noticed a flicker of pity on his face. It took me a moment to realize he wasn't feeling sorry for David, but for Ethan. David looked Ethan up and down and remarked that Ethan looked incredibly out of shape. He told him that his own physique was the result of hard work and discipline in the gym. He suggested that Ethan looked like he spent too much time partying and not enough time taking care of himself. He added that while lifting weights made a man strong, it unfortunately couldn't fix a lack of intelligence. He told Ethan that he should consider a gym membership, but then asked him who he actually was and why he was at our business dinner. He mocked Ethan's casual clothes and said he looked like a vagrant who had just wandered in off the street. He found it very convenient that Ethan just happened to run into Ava at a professional meeting. David told him that if he were actually Ava's boyfriend, he would just be a pathetic hanger-on. Since they weren't even dating, David said Ethan didn't even have the right to be a simp. He told him he was just an embarrassing nobody trying to act important. Ethan was so humiliated that his face turned a deep shade of red, and he couldn't even manage a coherent response. Everyone at the table was struggling to keep a straight face as they watched him crumble. After finishing his rant, David went right back to his meal without missing a beat. He finished off several bowls of soup and finished his plate before anyone else had even started. He looked over at Harrison and told him that his question about Ethan's identity was actually very important for the project. He told Harrison to find out exactly why an outsider was at our meeting and said it would determine which companies we would refuse to work with in the future. He grabbed his jacket and gave my shoulder a friendly pat before announcing that we were leaving. He told the rest of the group to enjoy their meal and walked out the door. Without thinking, I followed him out of the restaurant and into the cool night air. We lived in the same apartment complex, which was just a short walk from the office. Most of the people from our firm lived in that neighborhood because of the easy commute. As we walked, I tried to figure out how to tell him that the woman he just insulted was actually my ex. He had been so supportive and had completely shut down Ethan for me. I felt like I owed him the truth after he had gone out of his way to defend me. Before I could say a word, David looked at me and remarked that my ex-girlfriend was a total disaster. I was stunned that he had already figured it out. I stopped in my tracks and stared at him, which only made him laugh harder. He asked me if I was really that surprised that he had seen through the whole situation. He told me that he had seen her cornering me outside the office a few weeks ago and had overheard their entire conversation. He had simply stayed out of sight until the drama was over. He pointed out that her behavior during the meeting had been incredibly obvious to everyone in the room. He knew that even Harrison had noticed the tension between us. He explained that Harrison had only invited me to dinner to help me save face and to put Ethan in his place. It was all a calculated move to protect me from more embarrassment. I had never really talked to David before, but being honest with each other made the walk home much more comfortable. We ended up talking for the rest of the night about everything from work to our personal lives. I was shocked to find out that he was 10 years older than me because he had way more energy and confidence than I did. He seemed to have a completely different outlook on life. He laughed and said he had no reason to lie about his age. He told me that he never stayed in long-term relationships and preferred to keep things casual and fun. He refused to ever be anyone's servant and spent his money on his own hobbies like fitness and sports cars. He lived his life exactly the way he wanted to without any apologies. Talking to him made me realize that there were other ways to live my life. I had a great salary, but most of it had been spent on supporting my parents and keeping up with Ava's expensive lifestyle. Ava was obsessed with maintaining a luxury lifestyle and refused to settle for anything but the best. She had spent years spending my money on high-end clothes and expensive meals. I had spent years buying her things I couldn't really afford just to keep her happy. I remembered spending hundreds on designer gadgets and overpriced groceries that I would never have bought for myself. It might seem like small things, but the constant spending was a huge drain on my savings. I was a naturally frugal person, and the pressure of her demands had been slowly crushing me. I had reached a point where I had almost nothing left for my own needs after she was finished with my paycheck. I had been living for her for so long that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. David noticed my silence and asked me point blank if I was still in love with her. He could tell that I was struggling with the memories of our relationship. I told him that I was completely drained and had nothing left to give. He just shrugged and suggested that I should just find someone else and keep moving until I found the right person. He offered to set me up with someone, and we soon realized that our apartments were right next to each other. As he headed toward his building, he told me to take the night to relax and promised to take me out for a drink soon. I appreciated his genuine kindness and asked if he wanted to go out the next day. He immediately agreed and told me to meet him at the office after a shift. When I finally got back to my apartment, my work group chat was already buzzing with gossip about the dinner. Everyone was talking about how David was the only person with enough guts to stand up to the client like that. They joked that he was even more intimidating than our manager. David joked that Harrison was too afraid of him to ever actually fire him. The team agreed that David was too valuable to the company and that Harrison would do anything to keep him happy. David was a rare talent who could handle every aspect of our project from start to finish. He was incredibly efficient and always delivered high-quality work, making him indispensable to the firm. He joked that his arrogance was justified because he was about to launch a massive new project for the company. It was a good reminder that being irreplaceable was the best way to ensure job security. David had made himself so valuable that he could say whatever he wanted without fear of consequences. David's power came from his proven track record of success, but I realized that I had given Ava the same kind of power over me without her ever earning it. I had made her the center of my universe and convinced myself that I couldn't live without her. Because I had made her feel irreplaceable, she felt entitled to treat me however she wanted. I realized that her entire power over me was just a reflection of the love I was giving her. She never understood that a one-sided relationship could never last forever. Love requires effort from both people, and I was finally done doing all the work. Eventually, the fire just goes out or is replaced by something better. I wish her luck in her own life, but I was done being her support system. Harrison's attempts to play the tough boss didn't even last through the next morning after David's new project was a massive success. Harrison was suddenly all smiles as he checked in on David's progress. David announced to the entire office that he would have the results ready as soon as the team finished their afternoon break. Harrison took the hint and immediately offered to buy everyone coffee and snacks as a reward for their hard work. He told everyone to order whatever they wanted on the company's tab. Our partnership with CEO Wilson's firm was still going strong, which meant I had to see Ava around the office quite often. Harrison kept assigning me to work directly with her, which made for some very awkward meetings. David would just watch from across the room and shake his head in amusement. After one of our sessions, Ava asked me if I wanted to grab dinner with her. My first instinct was to say no, but I knew I needed to end things once and for all. I remembered David's advice about being decisive and realized that avoiding her would only make things worse in the long run. I decided to meet her one last time. It turned out that David was right. That night, Ava finally did something I thought she was incapable of doing. She apologized to me. She sat across from me with tears streaming down her face and told me how sorry she was for the way she had treated me. She admitted that she had been incredibly selfish and begged for my forgiveness. She promised never to threaten me with a breakup again and said she was ready to marry me immediately. She even said we could skip the expensive wedding and the down payment on a house that she had insisted on before. It was ironic because I had spent the last 10 years dreaming of the day she would say those words. I had wanted more than anything for her to be my wife. If she had said this a year ago, I would have been the happiest man alive. But hearing it now, I found the whole situation to be nothing more than a bad joke. I actually laughed out loud, which clearly surprised her. I asked her why she was suddenly so interested in marriage, and she tearfully told me that she loved me. She claimed that during our time apart, she had realized how much she relied on me for everything. She said that she couldn't stop thinking about me and our life together. She told me that I was like the air she breathed and that she hadn't realized how important I was until I was gone. She insisted that she couldn't survive without me by her side. I wished I could still feel something for her, but her words felt empty and hollow. Real love shouldn't be something you only notice once it's gone. I told her that words were cheap and that I had learned a very valuable lesson during our decade together. I asked her if she had any idea what she had actually taught me. I looked at her reflection and the tears in her eyes, and told her that she had taught me that I could survive just fine without her. I was proof that no one is actually indispensable. I grabbed my phone and stood up to leave, giving her one last polite smile. I told her to take those words to heart as my final gift to her. I told her that she would have plenty of time to experience life on her own, starting with the rest of this dinner. It was the perfect end to our long and painful story. I turned my back on her and walked away for the last time. I didn't feel the need to look back or see how she was taking it. I didn't check the reflection in the window or wait for her to call out my name. Her tears and her drama no longer had any power over me. I felt like a completely different person than the man who had arrived in San Francisco 6 months ago. The wound she had inflicted over the years had finally begun to heal. Those old memories were now just scars that no longer hurt. 2 years later, the project David and I had worked so hard on had become a massive success. My bank account was growing every day, and life was better than ever. During a break, David asked if I wanted to join him for his afternoon workout. He mentioned that a few of his female friends were joining us, but I still turned him down. I was never going to have his level of dedication to the gym, and I was perfectly happy being a bit of a homebody. I had tried working out with him for a few weeks, but realized it just wasn't for me. I preferred a much more relaxed lifestyle where I could just enjoy my free time. David laughed and told me it was fine, but he insisted that I show up for the blind date he had arranged for me. He had been talking about setting me up with a friend from college for months. He promised me she was incredibly sweet and that we would get along great. Before I could say no, he teased me about whether I was still holding a candle for my ex. He knew exactly how to push my buttons. David still loved to mock my past relationship, even though we had become close friends and business partners over the last couple of years. I finally gave in and told him that I was a fan of sweet girls. When I actually met her, I realized he hadn't been exaggerating. She was absolutely charming. She had a natural energy and warmth that made Ava's artificial beauty seem dull and faded. I found myself genuinely enjoying her company from the very first moment. We were out at dinner one night when we ran into Ava. She looked devastated and didn't show up at the office for 3 days after seeing us together. David joked that she was at home feeling sorry for herself, which was fine with me. I had long since moved on and had no interest in her feelings. We were both on our own paths now. I was finally happy and looking forward to the future while she was stuck in the past. Goodbye, Ava. After 10 years together, James was always the one to back down and apologize during their fights. It was not until he moved away that he realized how much more peaceful life could be without Ava constantly making demands. She eventually came to him in tears to apologize, but her sudden display of affection came much too late to spark any remaining feelings in his heart. Real growth is not about finally getting the apology you thought you deserved. It is about reaching a point where you simply no longer need to hear it.